In the last of a two-part series, now on BBC World, Nurses on the Front Line follows nurses giving battlefield treatment to civilians caught up in a 60-year-old conflict in the mountains of eastern Burma.
Up to 80% of the world's healthcare is provided by nurses and midwives. In the developing world, they are often a patient's only hope. It is the nurses and midwives who are often at the sharp end. Less fated than their glamorous doctor counterparts, paid a pittance, yet no less committed. They are the front line in the global health crisis. In this second instalment of Nurses on the Front Line, we take up the story of medics in eastern Burma. They are one of the few sources of medical attention for the Karen and the Karenni, minority peoples numbering 2 million. They have been in conflict with the government for nearly 60 years. These medics are attached to the FBR, the Free Burma Rangers, a volunteer aid and humanitarian organisation. Last time, we featured Tu Plu, Pu Tu, and Winston. Nurses like these, with only the most basic training, are one of the few sources of medical care in an area of mountainous jungle the size of Switzerland. In 4-month-long stints over the past 4 years, we filmed with the nurses on the arduous FBR missions. We went into what the Rangers describe as the war zone, the 250,000 square kilometre region of the eastern Burmese mountains. There, the Karen are resisting attempts by the junta to subjugate them. In May 2005, in its treatment of the Karen and other minorities, the European Parliament deplored the Burmese regime for carrying out a policy of ethnic cleansing. It's a nearly 60 years old, forgotten war. In the previous Nurses on the Front Line, we reported how an under-equipped Karen resistance force appears to be losing heart. We witness more and more Karen seeking internal exile or refuge across the border in Thailand. This time, we focus on Mono. He's a 34-year-old ethnic Karen. For the past 3 years, Mono has been working with the Free Burma Rangers. Founded in 1997, the organisation is financed by private donations, mostly from Christian groups in the USA. This is the conflict zone between the military and the KNU, Karen National Union. The KNU is the political wing of the Karens fighting for autonomy. The armed insurgents number barely more than 5,000. It's up to the FBR aid workers to arm themselves, but only for self-protection. The Rangers say they forbid all volunteers to engage with the Burmese military. The Rangers used to carry the medicines themselves, but recently they got hold of some pack horses and mules.
When we have to carry the aid ourselves, we can only take light loads. The horses mean we can take much heavier loads. That's why I like them.
It's mid-January 2007. The mission is made up of 12 horses, 40 porters, Mono and 8 other nurses, as well as an escort laid on by the Karen resistance movement. Our crew will be gone for a month, going into the heart of the conflict zone. After several days on foot, the mission reaches a village where the Burmese army has just launched a surprise attack. Guided by the locals, the Rangers nurse enters the remains of the village of Kali Ta, one of 10 communities destroyed, we are told, in this latest army assault. Here, the villagers were completely taken by surprise.
Over there, on the other side of the hill, there's an army camp. Suddenly, at 1 o'clock, the soldiers came over the ridge and set fire to our village.
Mono can only take stock of the damage and try to console the victims.
I feel sad. Karen villagers have done nothing wrong. However, the Burmese army hates them.
In Kali Ta, Burmese soldiers not only burnt down houses, the villagers tell us they also killed this man left behind because he was too sick to flee. Attacks are only the beginning of their problem. Often the soldiers will leave landmines. The mountains are riddled with untold thousands. We are told that landmines are the favourite weapon of the Burmese junta. Maim enough, and eventually the terrified people will leave for good. On a previous expedition in January 2006, we came across a victim of the policy. This 75-year-old farmer had stepped on a landmine. With him was a nurse from the KNU. He had to amputate with a pocket knife.
During the operation, he has got the...
He bled a lot during the operation. I was very worried that he might die.
I worry for the patient can die.
His penknife has come in handy before.
3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 person.
Incredibly, he claims that all these amputees have survived. Every valley in the mountainous Karen state now has its landmine victims. It's very difficult here to gather precise statistics, but the rangers tell us that there are now thousands of amputees, handicapped people too numerous to be looked after properly by these small communities. It's January 2007. We are back with Mono's expedition. The relief mission is on the move again. In some valleys, despite the danger, a handful of communities have chosen to stay. The Karen here try to live hidden lives, shunning all contact with the outside world. But on hearing about the arrival of the rangers, one family asks for help. Mono sets to work. In this little bamboo hut, a young woman has started to have contractions. But the child is 1 month premature. A few hours after the birth, the baby is still weak and having difficulty feeding. Without specific instruments and medication, the nurses have to rely on rudimentary methods. Mono explains that when a baby is premature, traditional medicine teaches that he should be wrapped in a blanket and exposed to sunlight. This time, the traditional approach won't work. Later, Mono will find out the child died just hours after the rangers left. It's 10 days into the relief expedition. News of the rangers' presence has spread, and hiding villagers, officially referred to as internally displaced persons, come out of the jungle. The rangers decide to prolong their stay in the valley. In the villages, the young nurse is making calls to nearly every house. Mono, with his basic hands-on training, must do the job of doctors with 8 years of medical school under their belts. Here, a boy has an abscess on his stomach. It was a small wound that became infected and could become life-threatening. It's in cases like this that Mono finds his real vocation.
Beforehand, I thought I would do something else with my life. But when I started these missions into the heart of the country, I realized the extent of the problems facing these people, their poor state of health and everything that they need.
Mono's missions don't always end this well. On a previous expedition, he entered a village shortly after an army raid. Amongst the victims was a ranger, one of Mono's best friends, killed on the spot, his face entirely blown off by a landmine explosion, a picture too terrible to show.
For the wounded one, I made the dressing, and I prayed that they stay alive. I didn't want to see them dying. Concerning the 3 who died, that's good, because they don't need to suffer anymore.
Back to January 2007, and the group of rangers Mono is attached to approaches the front line of the conflict. The rangers stop in a village, but they hardly have time to put down their things before the alarm is raised. A Burmese army patrol has been spotted nearby. The locals prepare to evacuate their village. They expertly gather together the most essential belongings. Finally, they take kitchen utensils and food scraps before disappearing into the night. Last year, rangers tell us, over 25,000 Karen were displaced in this part of the mountains. After the break, our journey takes us back into the war zone. We'll meet terrified communities that have just come under attack from the Burmese army. In the mountains of eastern Burma, a volunteer relief group called the Free Burma Rangers is bringing aid to the Karen, an ethnic minority in conflict with the military government. The Rangers team heads into the war zone, looking for victims. To avoid an ambush by the Burmese army, the escort takes more precautions. The area is dangerous, particularly when it comes to crossing a track used by Burmese army battalions. The crossing lasts no longer than a few minutes. On the track, the Rangers meet dozens of civilians fleeing the latest fighting. A reconnaissance team is sent to check on the positions of the Burmese infantry units. It's an opportunity for Mono to observe the army at a safe distance.
The government often tells lies and says there's no war in our country. As a result, people around the world have simply no idea what's going on here.
The scouts move in closer. Through a clearing in the vegetation, they can see Mo Pru camp. It's typical of a Burmese army jungle fortification. A volunteer cameraman accompanies each ranger's team to record the mission. After a while, a hut surrounded by fences attracts his attention. Based on its experience, the team guesses it's here that the Karen villagers, captured by the army, are detained. The rangers say these prisoners are forced to do hard labour. It's their job to build military camps and carry heavy loads for the army. These are just part of the 400,000-strong Burmese military. It's a force twice as big as the UK's. Its size is to keep control over the country, claim the insurgents. The Rangers claim these photos are of civilian prisoners. Men and women, killed, they say, because they attempted to escape or because they were too weak to continue carrying their heavy loads. In these circumstances, the Rangers' cameramen try to document as much as they can.
I don't know what I can do. I can try to do my best, take the pictures and send them around the world.
After a 10-day trek, the relief team is nearing its objective. The Rangers hope to track down a group of villagers in hiding in the forest. The commander of the local KNU unit acts as a guide. He has to avoid the mines laid by his own men. He says the KNU are forced to use the same tactics as their enemy. Shortly afterwards, the Rangers come across a group of refugees. They have been living in a state of constant fear since the attack on their village.
He doesn't have a flashlight. When the Burmese attack in the middle of the night, everyone scatters and the children are traumatized.
Around 100 people have been sleeping here in the open for several weeks. They've been living on virtually nothing. Mono was immediately concerned about their state of health. But these are hardy mountain people, and Mono finds nothing seriously wrong with them. Only a few skin infections are beginning to affect the children. The nurse gives out a little advice before returning later with some medicine.
In this type of situation, the most important thing is food. Beforehand, people could slip into the villages loosely controlled by the Burmese army, and there they could buy a little bit of food. But now the government has cracked down, and the people from the mountains have been cut off from the plains.
The Karen resistance claims it's part of its policy of ethnic cleansing.
On the front line, when the Burmese soldiers come across any girls, they rape them. If they come across any men, they kill them. And if they don't kill them, they abuse them any way they can.
It's part and parcel, claim the Karen, of forcing those inclined to continue the resistance across the border. Some 150,000 or so Karen are already exiled in Thailand. It's an agonizing decision, often put off until the very last minute. They know once they cross that border, it's probably the last time they'll see their native land again.
It's not that easy to go to Thailand. I'm getting older. The border is far away. So if I can stay with my family, I'm going to try to survive as long as possible in my country.
In the space of a couple of hours, the Rangers have set up a makeshift treatment centre in a clearing in the forest. Since its foundation, the organisation has carried out over 300 missions of this kind. In total, 300,000 people have been treated, and double that have received humanitarian aid. And the Rangers offer a degree of psychological help too. These internal refugees often feel abandoned. The FBR try to give them a semblance of normality. Mono has been nursing for 3 years, but recently he started to specialise in dental care. So will there ever be peace? Mono thinks the divide is too great.
When you look at history, the Karen were always one nation and the Burmese another. Our culture is different, our traditions too. I think we could work together, but we will never live together.
For the time being, no one has time to think about the future. The local KNU commander has received a worrying message. His scouts have spotted a unit of Burmese soldiers approaching the makeshift medical centre. Defending the villagers becomes the first priority. But very soon, news comes that the army is even closer than expected.
I think they're only half an hour away from here.
The villagers are gathered in this camp, normally used by Karen resistance fighters. The families are given instructions on how to reach predetermined hiding places. Once on their own, the resistance fighters get organised. The scouts indicate that the Burmese soldiers have stopped 500 metres short of the camp. They have no idea it's so close. The Karen fighters decide to take them by surprise. Sticking to their guideline, the Rangers take their non-combatant positions. Fighting is the business of the local KNU soldiers. All this small group of 20 has to fight the well-equipped Burma army is a handful of old guns and a rusty rocket launcher. It's now nearly 60 years that the Karen resistance has been fighting against the Burmese government, but they are losing heart. Deprived of outside help, only 5,000 fighters remain. Here, with their limited resources, the KNU fighters will have to aim straight.
We don't have enough equipment. We have to use guerrilla tactics. Although there's only 20 of us, we can still fight.
A half-hour wait, and there's a brief firefight. At nightfall, the KNU fighters return. They're all safe and sound. The following day, scouts confirm that the Burmese unit had left just after the ambush. As a precaution, the villagers remain in hiding in the forest. Now, other villagers need help. Mono sets off to find them. Another mission, full of danger.
In the field, sometimes we are afraid, but with my comrades we encourage ourselves. What we are doing is to free and to serve the people, so my fear goes away and my courage comes back.
Since this film was made, Mono has been on other FBR missions. We have been told since our crew left that many more villagers have been killed by the Burmese army. 3 FBR team members have also lost their lives.